An 8-year struggle to change the wording on a single identity card has ignited a religious war of words in Malaysia. Lena Joy wants to get her religious designation on her ID altered from Muslim to Christian. She converted to Catholicism some years ago. But that apparently simple request has put her into direct confrontation with the nation's Sharia court and the many Muslim groups who argue that switching faiths should not and cannot be allowed. I'm Taimur Nabili, and on this edition of 101 East, we look at the conflict between individual belief, the law, and religious custom. In many countries where religion plays a large role in public life, the issue of converting from one religion to another can be highly controversial, and nowhere is that more true than in Malaysia. In this country, there is an unusual structure where the national legal system coexists with a religious court, and it's led to ongoing conflict. Fawzia Ibrahim has this report.
Malaysia has long had a reputation for religious tolerance. Mosques, churches and temples have, for decades, added their own notes to the national religious conversation. But now the country's highest court has also added its voice. After an 8-year battle, the civil court has refused to recognize a Muslim-born woman's conversion to Christianity. The federal court ruled that Lena Joy had to seek official permission from the religious authorities or the Sharia court for her conversion. Many Muslims in Malaysia welcome the court's verdict.
The vast majority, near consensus, takes the position that apostasy is prohibited, is an offense, punishable offense. As Muslims, we may, no matter how modern you like to see yourself, or how liberal you like to portray yourself, you have to deal with this. This is part of submission.
Constitutional lawyer Malik Imtiaz has had to pay for his dissenting view. His public support for Lena Joy has led to posters calling for his murder.
As a Muslim, I don't see my religion as actually enjoining persecution of individuals who are seeking, some sort of relief or justice. Ultimately, it's a matter between the individual and God.
But religion isn't simply a personal matter in Malaysia. Magendran is among the 7% that make up the country's Indian Hindus. 10 months ago, he married Najira, who was raised as a Muslim but later became a Hindu. The Muslim authorities considered their union illegal.
We were at home on the night of April 28. 7 officers from the State Islamic Affairs Department knocked on our door. I refused to open the door. They were so loud, they disturbed the whole neighborhood. The officers said they were taking my wife away because she's a Muslim and cannot stay with me. My wife was crying. I told her to go with them and I will do all I can to get her released. A few weeks later, a religious teacher approached me and asked me to convert to Islam if I wanted my wife back. My wife also wrote to me saying she was being held at a religious rehabilitation center. She said she was suffering and she wanted me to take her out of the center.
Al Jazeera understands Najira is still being held at a faith rehabilitation center and her release date is unknown.
There's a conflict here, and this Magendran's situation is such where we have 2 laws existing in which one to apply, because she's a Muslim and he's a Hindu.
The basis for many of Malaysia's religious disputes seem to lie in the country's contradictory constitution. While the legislation guarantees freedom of worship, it also states Islam is the nation's official religion.
The system that we have so far have maintained that we do not practice unlimited or unfettered freedom of religion in the country, and more so for the Muslims, because our idea of freedom of religion has always been guided by what the religion teaches us.
The Lina Joy case has made news around the world, but this is not just a dispute about religion, with some commentators arguing it also touches on the sensitive issue of Malaysia's race relations.
The linkage between the Malay ethnicity and religion is something which we can't overlook as well. And so it's very useful at the end of the day to emphasize religion when one is intent on carrying through a process which is built on ethnic or communal foundations.
Historically, Malaysia has battled to maintain a fine balance amongst its racial and religious groups. The government practices affirmative action for indigenous people and the 60% Malay Muslim majority in fields like housing, education and employment. Authorities credit such programs for keeping racial and religious discord relatively low. But the nation's minorities disagree and furthermore fear the growing Islamization could threaten their civil rights. Often these arguments over religion, race and economics become secondary when personal costs are at stake. For Magendran, his fight for his wife and faith continues.
I
want the authorities to return my wife to me. I just pray that she comes back as a Hindu.
I'm joined in the studio for more on this subject by Farish Noor, who's an academic and cultural commentator. Lim Heng Seng is a lawyer here in Kuala Lumpur. And Dr. Syed Ali Taufiq Al-Atas is the Director General of the Institute of Islamic Understanding. Thank you all for being with us today. We saw there on that film a leader of Malaysia's Muslim youth movement saying unequivocally that for the vast majority, apostasy, the change of your religion to a different one, is a punishable offence. Is he right?
Yes, he's right, but this is not true for all states in Malaysia. There are some states, I believe, who have criminalized it, although I can't speak authoritatively as far as that is concerned.
Can you speak authoritatively as a general principle of Islam? Is it punishable?
According to what? Islam? Well, there is no enactment of punishment if you look at the Quran. There is only a punishment with regard to apostasy if you distinguish between the Sharia and the Hudud law. According to the Hudud law, of course, the punishment is very severe, punishable by death. But there is a historical precedent why that is the case. This Hudud law, if you remember, it was enacted by the second caliph. The reason he did this was because it was only 15 years after the death of the Prophet. And at that time, there was already the danger of Muslims leaving Islam and going back to the Jahiliyyah mentalities, the tribal mentalities, injustice, etc. So in order to detract from that, dissuade them from doing this, the most severe laws were enacted. And therefore, if now we are asked the question, is it right to enact Hudud laws now? I think I think that would be wrong to say that we should enact Hudud laws now.
From a Christian perspective, what is the treatment of an apostate?
Well, faith comes from belief. One has to actually imbibe the particular religious teaching of that religion he wants to believe in. And having done that, it is willing submission. We do not see a person living religion as an offense. Of course, a Christian, a co-religionist will feel saddened. He will feel that, well, one of our own have left the faith. To the extent that he's willing to be counseled, we will counsel him.
Have you seen evidence that perhaps there have been pockets of population that have reacted in extreme manners to the idea of someone leaving the faith?
In terms of Christianity,
Yeah.
certainly no. No, I don't see that as a major problem. To us, salvation in the Christian religion is something which comes by the grace of God. No compulsion, no force of law can ever make a person a Christian. One does not enforce religious belief to the force of law.
Let me just take it outside the realm of religion and ask, should we be having a conversation about religion at all? Is this the cultural and domestic political issue that we're really dealing with here?
No, I think when we look at what's been happening in Malaysia over the past 2 or 3 years in particular, the political dimension comes out a lot. It's interesting that Professor Al-Atas mentioned the roots of Hudud going back to the particular period of early tribal feudal politics in the early Muslim community, because here I'm reminded of what was said by the late Professor Nurholis Majid of Indonesia, where he looked at this phenomenon of a communal reaction to one member leaving a particular religion and diagnosed it in terms of a sort of residual tribal politics, so to speak. And for Majid at the time, the anxiety felt by, say, Muslims in this case, when one of them chooses to leave their community, was very much akin to a sort of tribal reaction. And we've seen that in the sort of hate language that has emerged over the past couple of years in the cases that we've looked at before, such as Lina Joy's, where Lina Joy is described, or was described, as not only a traitor to Islam, but also as a traitor to the Malay race. So I can't help but feel that underlying all this, we are basically looking at the playing out of Malaysia's sectarian communal politics, and it has more to do with that.
But it's not just Malaysian, though, is it? I mean, we've seen instances of Muslim communities persecuting heretics, apostates in other countries as well.
That's true, but also historically, and here I would slightly disagree with what previous person has said. If you look at the history of Christianity, in times of crisis, communities react to those leaving the community very easily.
One can't forget the Inquisition, of course.
Of course.
You asked me about today.
Yes.
If you ask me about history, I can give you a whole series, and we accept that. Yes. Historically, it has happened, and today we have learned the mistakes. Yes.
And yet we haven't brought the Inquisition's history into modern day. But here we are talking about this issue. I was interested that immediately you were already beginning to differentiate between various branches and various understandings. Is that actually a positive way forward? I mean, if you can say clearly to the audience that the Quran does not deem it a punishable offence, then is that not a message you can take to the community and say, listen, this is what you should be focusing on?
I did not say the Quran did not deem it a punishable offence. I said the punishment was not included in the Quran. There was no punishment mentioned in the Quran. That does not mean that it's not a punishable offence. But again, if you are asking the question about whether Christianity regards apostasy as a problem, there is no enactment in Christianity about apostasy to begin with. So the question is really irrelevant. And therefore, when it comes to Islam, because it has it, it does not mean that it is a shortcoming in terms of Islam.
Let me pose the question to you again then. I mean, within the context of the Quran itself, please explain the philosophy behind the idea that apostasy is such a grave crime.
Well, it's akin to making a contract. That is what it is. When you become a Muslim, when you profess the creed, the shahada, you are actually making a contract which is binding between you and God. And therefore now you are breaking that contract, and therefore there is a punishment for it. I mean, even in civil law you have a criminal breach of trust when it comes to contractual, you're not honoring a contract.
But these are contracts entered into voluntarily. Islam is not necessarily something one enters into voluntarily.
When you become a Muslim, it is of your free will and volition. There is no compulsion.
Right. What about people who are born into that religion?
Yes, precisely. I mean, I think this and these sort of cases actually force us to perhaps raise the question of where contemporary Muslim theology is heading, or how it can adapt or should adapt to the realities of our time. Because precisely the Lina Joy case and cases like hers, in such instances, there is no rational agency or will involved, because she did not choose to be a Muslim. I did not choose to be a Muslim. You did not choose to be a Muslim. And so what happens in instances like this when someone on her own volition, without being compelled to do so, decides to leave Islam for another religion? This poses a deep theological question and legal question.
Right. And therefore, this is not the platform for that. This is a theological question. The answer is very lengthy, although we can still...
Well, I mean, this is a reasonable platform for at least some of these ideas. So let me ask you clearly, if we accept the idea that there should be punishment, and I'm not saying that that is something that should be accepted, but let's take that as a basis for the next question. Should the punishment be death? Should the punishment be the kind of...
I think there has been a lot of misrepresentation as well. There is fear,
well,
obviously.
I'm just asking for your interpretation.
Yes. I'm not saying that there is unjustified fear and angst. No, there is some justification for that. But I wonder if you know really what the Sharia courts in Malaysia here met out as the most severe punishment. In any case, the most severe punishment in the Sharia courts in Malaysia for any case is 3 years in prison, 5,000 ringgit fine, and 6 strokes of the rotan. no death at all.
Well, many
And
people,
that
many
is
people
the
would
most
consider,
extreme.
Many people would consider those punishments to be extreme too. But I'm glad you brought up the issue of the Malaysian courts and the Sharia system, because that in itself is an interesting microcosm. We will pick that subject up in just a moment after we've come back from this short break. You're watching 101 East. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes.